Jack Martin, Coordinator of Collection Management at Public Record Office Victoria. Welcome to the Open House Melbourne tour. We're standing in the foyer of the Victorian Archives Centre, and behind me is the Victorian Archives Centre Gallery.
Hi, my name's Sebastian Gucciolo. I'm a Project Officer in Collection Management at Public Record Office Victoria. I'm also part of the curatorial team that puts together photographic exhibitions in the Victorian Archives Centre Gallery that we're in at the moment. The current exhibition is In the Shadows. It broadly interprets the idea of shadows as they exist in our photographic collections, and also invites contributions from street photographers to submit their own interpretation of the theme. The archival photographs that are in this exhibition are from the collections of both Public Record Office Victoria and the National Archives of Australia Melbourne office. If you'd like to explore current or past exhibitions, you can do so on our website.
All right, let's go down to the repository and look at some records from the collection. Public Record Office Victoria is the archives of the State Government of Victoria. Our collection of over 100 kilometres of records includes records of immigration and shipping, wills and probates, royal commissions and boards of inquiry, major government departments, inquests and a variety of other records. Our reading room services around 9,000 people per year, and they look at around 45,000 records per year. We also issue a further 6,000 records to government agencies. This is the Victorian Archives Centre repository. We're on level 1 and above us is level 2. They're basically two big concrete boxes filled with records. There are around about 100 linear kilometres of records held in our collection, and there are also repositories at Ballarat, Beechworth, Bendigo and Geelong. The temperature of the repository is kept to around about 19 to 20 degrees Celsius and around about 45 to 50% relative humidity, keeping it as stable as possible. And we can help keep it stable by using the airlocks that you saw us come through earlier. They offer greater security as well. We share this warehouse space with tenants such as the National Archives of Australia, Australian Centre for the Moving Image, National Gallery of Victoria, the Hyder Gallery and the Arts Centre. The PROV collection value for insurance purposes is around about $317 million. In the case of fire, we use water, not foam or gas, to protect the collection. And if a record is wet, we can freeze dry it, dehumidify it and even digitise the record to protect the information.
As part of this presentation for Open House Melbourne 2020, we've selected a number of records from our collection that show places in Melbourne and its suburbs. Many of these records are plans, maps or drawings that provide historical detail about those places. They document buildings, infrastructure, facilities and street layouts. In addition, we will be presenting some records that tell us about what happened in those places that help to provide a context for the activities and events that took place at one time or another in the history of Melbourne.
PROV holds many thousands of Public Works Department drawings. These are drawings of buildings used for government purposes, and included in those is the old Melbourne Jail, which is currently a heritage building on Russell Street. This plan shows the central hall and chapel of the prison complex. The plan is dated December 1860 and shows architectural features of the prison's central hallway and chapel. Across the top of the plan, the original title has been crossed out and the words Emily McPherson School of Domestic Economy have been added, which tell us what became of this part of the prison once a larger facility was needed that could cope with Melbourne's booming prisoner population. The Melbourne Jail operated from 1842 to 1924. However, from about 1860 onwards, it was used mainly to hold short-term prisoners, including those on remand or awaiting execution. This shift in purpose was a result of the huge influx of people that arrived in Victoria during the gold rushes that started in the 1850s. It was no longer able to accommodate the number of prisoners that were being sentenced to prison terms at a time when criminal activity was increasing, particularly as unsuccessful diggers returned from the goldfields and poverty drove them to illegal means of support. While the new prison building at Pentridge was under construction, many criminals were held in floating prisons on Port Phillip Bay, which were called hulks. We know a great deal about the prisoners that were held in Victorian jails through the Central Register of Male Prisoners and the Central Register of Female Prisoners. The male register is comprised of 100 volumes and the female register 15 volumes. These records, which commence in 1850 and document prisoners through to 1948, registered prisoners received at Melbourne area prisons, including the Collingwood, Carlton and Williamstown stockades, the Eastern Jail, the hulks and then Pentridge. Victorian prisons were amongst the earliest users of the still new technology of photography. Photographs added a visual record to the registers, a way of easily identifying those who had sentences longer than 6 months duration that passed through Pentridge and thus Melbourne's prison system. 2 photographs of the notorious bushranger Edward Ned Kelly are in these registers. Only 3 other photographs of him are known to exist. His prisoner number in the register is 10926. The page includes details of an earlier conviction in 1871 for receiving a stolen horse, for which he was tried in Beechworth. The details of his conviction for murder were added in 1880. Other information on the page includes details about his physical features and appearance, and lightly in pencil in the margin, a calculation of his age when he was executed in 1880. There are 2 photographs on the page, one dating from his earlier conviction, where he is clean-shaven, and another for his 1880 conviction, in which he is bearded. On these pages from the female register, there are 2 prisoners who were both arrested and convicted for the crime of vagrancy in 1932. Violet Jacobson, prisoner number 7707, and Alice Bella Piolan, prisoner number 7708. At the time, if you did not have a place to sleep for the night, you could be arrested, and if you were declared vagrant, you could have ended up as a day patient at a mental asylum. Other common crimes of the time included selling sly grog, illegally trading in alcohol, which broke Victoria's liquor licensing laws in the Prohibition era. Another was insufficient means of support, which gave police discretion to arrest anyone who could not show they had a legal means of supporting themselves financially. You can search our prison registers online and download pages as high-resolution PDFs. Amongst the other records held by PROV is this volume titled Returns of Criminals Executed in Victoria and Prisoners Sentenced to Death whose sentence has been commuted. This volume was used to record details of prisoners who were executed in Victoria and of prisoners who were sentenced to death but whose sentence was subsequently commuted to a lesser charge. This final entry in the volume is for Ronald Ryan, written in blue ballpoint pen. He was sentenced to hang following a failed prison escape on the charge that he had shot a prison guard during the escape and killed him. Since his execution, there has been some evidence to indicate that he may not have fired the fatal shot that killed the guard. The protests over his death sentence ended capital punishment in Australia but did not save him. He was hanged on 3rd February 1967. The entry on Ned Kelly in this volume is the only government record known to exist that notes that Ned Kelly was buried at the Old Melbourne Jail after his execution, even though it does not specify the exact location.
Among the most significant records held by PROV relating to residential architecture and design are these plans from the State Bank of Victoria. They show housing plans that they created between the 1920s and the 1960s. People could buy a land package that included both land and a house plan at the same time. The bank employed top architects in the city to design the plans for them, and people could buy the plan that best suited their needs. The modernist home designs are fascinating as they reflect a shift away from traditional forms of home design such as Victorian or Californian bungalow, and they offered people the chance to have a contemporary design produced by a renowned architect. Because thousands of homes were built based on these plans, this collection is a significant record of mid-century housing design in Melbourne.
The Coburg Mosque was constructed in the 1970s by the Turkish Islamic Society and has had a number of modifications made during subsequent years. In the external design and layout of the Coburg Mosque is very modern and functional, with the only features distinguishing the building from its neighbours as an Islamic religious building being the minaret and a small dome that adorns the building. While the building originally featured a body of water in the courtyard, the need to accommodate the increasing size of the faith community saw it make way for additional structures and alterations of the mosque facilities. In 1978, the President of the Society sought approval from the Secretary of the Commission of Public Health for the use of a holding room, or morgue, as a place to keep the bodies of those who had passed away. The letter explains that under Islamic law, the dead should be under the care of Muslims, and they were unable to use funeral parlours. The room, the letter continues, would hold the bodies of the dead as they awaited being transported for burial in Turkey, according to family wishes. The complex is not only a place of worship, but also serves as an educational hub and provides a space for other activities of the local Muslim community. At the time of the request for a holding room, the correspondence noted that the complex included the mosque itself, a library, a meeting room, a general learning area, and a teacher's room. The request was approved pending some modifications to the building to make it compliant with the Public Building Regulations 1952, and a number of other matters, in particular a request for a sample of the curtains that were to be used. The fabric sample is part of the file. Interestingly, it was tested for fire retardancy and was found to be unsuitable for a public building. Formal approval for the building to be used as a public building was issued on the 1st of December 1981. The plans of the mosque held by PROV are part of a series of records that document compliance with health and safety standards for places accessed by members of the public for the purpose of education, excluding state primary and secondary schools, and for entertainment, amusement and recreation. These include such buildings as hospitals, theatres, opera houses, concert rooms, dance halls, cinemas, skating rinks, tents or structures, galleries and platforms, churches, chapels or meeting houses, and non-government schools.
Robert Hoddle was an artist and a surveyor. He is best known as the Surveyor General of the Port Phillip district between 1837 and 1853, especially for the creation of what is known as the Hoddle Grid, the area of the CBD of Melbourne bounded by Flinders, Spencer, Lonsdale and Spring Streets. This map was created around 1842, very shortly after the Melbourne township began and a few surrounding suburbs were emerging. There are property blocks and streets shown for various suburbs like St Kilda, Sandridge, East Melbourne and South Melbourne, but they all differ from what actually got built in those locations. Property blocks are also shown for Melbourne's Hoddle Grid, as well as the locations of various markets, actual and proposed, and the sites for public or government buildings. The Botanic Gardens are proposed for a site on the Yarra at the southwest corner of the Hoddle Grid, near Batman's Hill, and the numerous marshes and swamps that used to be a feature of the land south of the Yarra and west of the city are prominent features. As an artist, Hoddle also enjoyed the process of sketching a landscape as he surveyed it. Perhaps this map helps you get a sense of that combination of artistry and planning. It is a wonderful early aerial view of a developing city, and one man's dreaming of plans for its future, the features of which never eventuated quite as envisaged at this moment in time.
Whilst PROV holds many plans of grand buildings such as the Supreme Court or Parliament, there are also other far less prominent buildings represented in the collection. Sometimes these records turn up in unexpected places other than in the main series of building plans and drawings. For instance, the records you're currently seeing relate to a water tunnel for the City of Melbourne Power Station in Spencer Street from 1941. In addition to being able to see details relating to the water tunnel, there are also floor plans of the power station itself and its locale in the city. Plans of the facility can also be seen in the file documenting an inquest into the untimely deaths of Arthur John Ashman and Arthur James Anderson. The blueprint you are seeing of the power station's electrical plans were originally traced in 1920. They were produced as evidence as part of the inquest into the deaths of Ashman and Anderson, because on 26 March 1926 they were inspecting this high voltage equipment in the Spencer Street powerhouse. During the inspection, high tension switchgear controlling 6600 volts fused, causing fatal electrical burns to both workmen. The blueprints are control diagrams of safety equipment in the area where the incident occurred, and were used as evidence during the inquest to determine the cause of the men's deaths. At the time, inquests were held in a number of circumstances, including sudden deaths. As a general rule, we keep plans and records about important infrastructure, such as facilities that generate our energy supplies, not only for historical reasons, but because they may need to be referenced for future modifications, as well as the ongoing management and maintenance of those facilities over a very long period of time.
Did you know that the Queen Victoria Market, the Melbourne institution that attracts visitors and locals alike, was once the site of the old Melbourne Cemetery? This burial ground was in existence from as early as 1837. A plan first created in 1839 shows a number of sections for religious denominations and includes a section for Aboriginal people that was added in 1842. Two Aboriginal men, Tuna Minavate and Malboy Hina, both from Van Diemen's Land, which was what was Tasmania was known as, they were members of a group of Aboriginal people brought to the Port Phillip district by George Augustus Robinson, who became Chief Protector Aborigines in the new colony. The two men were convicted for murdering colonists in the Dandenong and Western Port areas in 1841, and were the first people to be hanged in Melbourne and the first Aboriginal people to be buried at the cemetery following their execution by hanging in 1842. The gradual expansion and encroachment of the marketplace saw the slow demise of the cemetery holdings, with land increasingly being taken over for the purpose of the market. By the 1850s, a new cemetery was opened in Carlton to cater for burials. In 1917, the final burial in the old Melbourne Cemetery took place. Exhumations, the process of removing and relocating people's remains from graves, began in mid-1920. The cemetery was eventually closed permanently by 1922, having been the final resting place for up to 10,000 Victorians. Only 1,000 people were exhumed, however, because most of the records were no longer available and many plots were unmarked. This record, Plans of Exhumations, Old Melbourne Cemetery, 1885 to 1920, is a large white pencil sketched map with ticks on the gravestones. It was drawn by George Sims of the Melbourne City Council to identify the 525 graves to be exhumed and relocated to Fawkner in 1922. The map contains the location of each of the numbered graves within the sections allocated to each religious denomination. Some people were opposed to the removal of the cemetery. We know about this from the various printed protest material, petitions and letters that can be found in the correspondence records of the Melbourne General Cemetery Trust. The Melbourne Cemetery Preservation League was formed to oppose the removal of graves, and in 1917 they were actively campaigning to stop what they believed to be an act of desecration. Some of the actions of the League are documented in records that were kept by the Cemetery Trust, including letters from the Honorary Secretary of the League, A.H. Padley, protest leaflets, as well as a copy of the petition used to garner public opposition. Among other records in the inward correspondence of the Melbourne General Cemetery Trust is a letter from the Central Board for the Protection of Aborigines addressed to the trustees of the cemetery, signed by the board's Honorary Secretary Robert Brow Smythe, dated 15 October 1864, requesting a location be set aside at the new cemetery in Carlton for Aboriginal people to be buried, as was the case with the old cemetery. The request was not accepted.
Thanks for joining us on the tour of the Victorian Archives Centre for Open House Melbourne 2020.
We hope that you've enjoyed our presentation today, and we hope that you enjoy all the other ones that are up online from Open House Melbourne 2020.